Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulullah. Oh my goodness, has this been long overdue? And I am so sorry. This is actually my third time, by the way, recording the episode in full because the first time I felt like I was not speaking with any clarity. I was bouncing all over the place and I just went on rambling. I was speaking up until 45 minutes where I decided, you know what, it's not going well. Second time, I recorded an hour and 15 minutes and I listened back, and because I was recording in my room right next to my vent and I had my mic set up incorrectly, you can hear the background noise and that really bothered me. Like I couldn't even listen to the audio. So inshallah, this ends up being the audio that I do use. But of course, me pushing off actually recording the podcast for basically 2 months now is not because I had to re-record it. It's honestly because perfectionism is so paralyzing sometimes. When I first knew I actually wanted to start this, I had to first decide on a name. And when I tell you guys that alone took me like 3 to 4 weeks, I had a list of about 25 to 30 names. And from there, I had to go from like 30 down to 25, down to 20, down to 15, 10. I got stuck between my top 8 for a little bit, and choosing between the last 3 guys, I'm already indecisive as is. And this is where the paralysis kind of kicks in because I'm stuck trying to pick the perfect name. So in order for me to have made the decision that I did, which I'll explain why I chose this name a little bit later on, inshallah, but I consulted so many different people. I consulted people of different age groups, different backgrounds, non-Muslims, Muslims, reverts, just to understand what they did and didn't like about each name. And that was just the first hurdle. The second hurdle is picking the cover for the podcast. It didn't take me long to design. I literally create a design, replicate it, and then change the font. And the font wouldn't even be something drastically different. It would be very similar. And that was the buffer moment there. And then the third hurdle was just unnecessary. It was picking the mic. I pushed that off maybe for like 3 weeks. And that's because honestly, like when I first started looking into it, I started seeing different types. Like, bro, there was no reason for me to have actually found it that difficult because it wasn't. I just was pushing it off. When you want every single thing to be perfect, the reality is it won't, and that will literally paralyze you from doing anything. So instead of you actually getting yourself on your feet and starting, you're just there. You know what I mean? And that's exactly what I was doing, and I hated it. Because at the end of the day, like your first anything isn't ever going to be the best. So to have that goal is just very unrealistic. Alhamdulillah though, I got over it. And honestly, I am so excited. Despite all of that, I have been looking forward to this for the longest time. But before we really dive into anything deep yet, I do want to give myself a slight introduction just because I have no idea who's watching this. For all I know, you can be someone who knows me in person, or maybe you know me from my social media, or maybe you just randomly stumbled upon my podcast. With that being said, my name is Safa. A lot of people tend to think that my name is Safa, but I actually do have a hamza at the end of my name in Arabic, so it's Safa. I mention that just because though, if anyone actually were to call me Safa, I really don't mind. I just turned 23 weeks ago, alhamdulillah. Been living in Canada almost my whole life. I grew up here since a very, very young age. Ethnically, I'm from Libya, which is in North Africa for anyone who does not know, because I have had people before mix up Libya with Lebanon. So they're 2 separate countries, and I've been in public school my whole life, both in elementary school and in high school. And now I'm currently in my 3rd year of university. I'm starting classes right now just because I feel like I need to do something with my time. And like I said, some of you might know me from my social media. TikTok I've been on longer than Instagram. I've had TikTok since 2019. And it's actually very ironic because I was that person at the time who would make fun of other people who either downloaded it, watched videos, or made videos. And little did I know that I would actually be amongst those people myself, subhanAllah. I vividly remember downloading it in the summer of 2019, and I remember at first I did not know how to use the app at all. Like for some reason, I found it so complicated. Not the For You page scrolling, obviously. I was on like mainstream TikTok, by the way. But making the video itself, like there's just too many things. So I never really bothered with it. Obviously with time, a few months pass and I play with it here and there, made some silly videos, just all my drafts. I'd post it on like my private story or something. And that's because in general, I'm a very private person, which is also ironic, I know, especially at the time. Like I didn't get Instagram until I was in 10th grade. I was not really one to be so fond with social media presence at all. It wasn't until one time I was in the kitchen with my little brother. We were making a silly TikTok video. Then my mom told me, she was like, why don't you actually post videos? And I was kind of taken aback. I was not expecting that at all. Like I was expecting my mom to be like, don't post, don't do anything, like be private. But I kind of took that as a green light. I'm not gonna lie. Like I heard that, I was like, That's a really good question, bet. So I started posting in October of 2019, and between then and March of 2020, I was doing like the most random stuff. Like it was such mainstream, like I had no niche. The reason why I mention all of that is because I feel like it's very relevant to not just this episode, but every episode oncoming. So between October of 2019 and March of 2020, I was posting the most random stuff. It was just stuff that I thought other people would like. March of 2020 was wild. I had 2 videos just blow up. One was just random. I had braces at the time and it was about that. And then another one was a story time. And I remember from there, like I continued posting, but again, I was just posting what I thought other people would like. I was not being authentic at all. And at the time too, I wasn't as practicing as a Muslim. I also wasn't wearing hijab. Like I just wasn't connected to my faith as much. And it was around that time that I kind of just detached myself from social media. I didn't feel like I could resonate with anything. I didn't feel like I had a sense of direction, not even just with my social media presence, but that reflected with myself. I didn't feel like I knew who I was. And that's when COVID kicked in. Like I was kind of going through a journey of finding myself. Like, who am I? What do I even like? And then I took a long break. From May until November, I did not really post. I went through some things and I had a lot to work on myself. The impacts COVID had on me and just where I was at mentally made me not want to be on social media. And of course, it wasn't until November that I actually started posting again. But this time, it was a bit different. During that break, I also reconnected to my faith, which was much needed at the time. I became more curious about Islam because growing up, yes, I attained Islamic education throughout the weekends. Like I attended Saturday school and Sunday school and Quran classes, so I was knowledgeable, but I was not practicing. Like I really wasn't. I wasn't living my day-to-day life or a lifestyle that was in the core Islamic. It was during that time that I yearned to Islam again. And it wasn't in any severe way. It was just very gradual. So in November, I came back on TikTok and I just started posting about things that I really enjoyed and things that I loved, which was Islam and my culture. And my Islamic videos, I'd post them not rarely, but also it wasn't like my entire content. And I wouldn't say I was giving dawah online at the time, but I was making refutation videos, argumentative videos, I was stitching videos and kind of doing clapback videos. And between that time and March of 2021, I had rapid growth in my account. And that impacted me, not in any way related to numbers, but because the moment I started posting about Islam and talking about Islam, I was finally on Muslim TikTok. Like I was off mainstream, now I'm Muslim. But alhamdulillah, the reason why I found a lot of enjoyment from it, it's so much deeper than that. I felt like growing up, again, in a non-Muslim community, I lacked a Muslim community. I lacked sisterhood. And so the lack of having a friend group who practice the beliefs that you have can affect you. Alhamdulillah, like growing up, I've always surround myself with as good people as I could, all throughout elementary and high school as well. But it really is different when you're around Muslim people growing up because you're constantly reminded of just the core values of Islam and having people who remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I don't say that to sound like, oh my goodness, I'm so sad. I wish I could have. No, because alhamdulillah, I've had my own journey and I wouldn't be here without anything leading up to this point. And maybe a lot of you guys can resonate with what I will be saying throughout this podcast because of what I went through growing up. My presence on social media was one that was deep to me because I finally felt like I had the community that I never had growing up. Side note, I just want to clarify that although I live in a non-Muslim majority area, I just wasn't involved for the majority of my life, considering that I also spent the most amount of time at school, spending 8 hours a day at school every single day, 5 days a week. So I think pointing to that kind of explains my disconnect from there. But yeah, being online was just so much more to me. I had the community that I felt like I didn't have for a really long time. I'm interacting with Muslimin on a daily basis now. I'm learning from other people on social media. By the way, when it comes to complicated manners and certain things about Islam, be responsible and don't take everything from social media because not everything is correct. There are some matters in Islam that are a lot more complicated that a 30-second, a 10-second, or a minute video will not be able to fully dissect. Please make sure to verify your information, fact check it, ask your teacher, ask a sheikh, like do your due diligence, please. But with that being said, there was a lot of benefit for me at the time because I was getting, of course, not just actual information or knowledge from the app, but create that spark for me to want to learn more, to go out of my way and outside of it want to learn. I always hear people say, oh, social media is such a fitna and this and that. But genuinely, for the most part, right, your social media will be a reflection of you. To some degree, you do have power over what you see because the algorithm is trained to what? Keep you on their app for as long as possible, no matter what social media app that is. So they're going to spew out content that they think that you'll interact with or engage with. And what do they base that off of? What you usually interact with, engage with, watch for the longest amount of time, and so on and so forth. Because I was at the time consistently engaging with, posting about, commenting on, and whatnot with Islamic content or Arab content, that's what I was seeing the most. Like, again, there were reminders on the app for me. I was learning. But I'd also be able to resonate with people who are like me. That does wonders. Like, it really does. It really did wonders for myself. Like, knowing that, you know what, there are other people who share the same struggles that I do. Like, getting advice from people on how to navigate through this worldly life, like, it had the biggest impact on me. So the same way that you can use social media for bad, for looking at bad, for listening to bad, and so on, you can also use it for good, right? And then from March of 2021, that's when I started thinking about hijab. Now, I'm going to leave majority of the whole hijab topic for a different episode because there's just a lot to elaborate on, and honestly I can do multiple episodes on that. But in summary, there are a few certain people who reached out to me, one specifically I remember, and asked me just genuinely, what is stopping me from wearing it? And it was until I got asked that question very bluntly, kindly, but just very bluntly as is, that I realized that I was making excuses for myself. And you know what? The way that I saw it was just, I love this so much and I love Islam so much that I saw hijab as another way to obey my Lord. I saw hijab as just another thing that I can be doing to satisfy Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let this be another thing that I do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to do this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, I want to be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that was how I felt like I could get closer to Him. We're going to fast forward. I started covering my hair online. I stopped posting in August of 2021 because I wasn't wearing hijab and I didn't feel comfortable being on social media without wearing hijab anymore, because at least if I wasn't going to wear it in person, like in real life, I just don't want to post on social media. Even if my hair is covered, I just felt like it was very hypocritical. I just was not comfortable with it. I was going through a lot of things, and it wasn't really the best time for me to be online. I then wore it last year, April 2nd of 2022. Alhamdulillah, it was the first day of Ramadan. And that's when I also got back on social media. Between then and I want to say like literally just a few months ago, I was on social media. I was posting, doing my thing, being like an Islamic / Muslim / hijabi content creator. And it's not like, oh, I put hijab and my growth stopped. Like, you're always growing and changing as a person. And I'm going to be so honest, guys. Wallahi, I feel like I experienced the most growth in like the last 5 months. While I was on social media last year from April to December, January, I was posting like everything just with hijab. I was still posting with music. I was posting with makeup. I never wore like leggings or anything tight, but I still wasn't abiding by like the Islamic definition of modesty and hijab. So yes, I was on social media again. Yes, I was wearing hijab, but I wasn't pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm going to be so honest, like, this mindset did not kick in literally until a few months ago. This last January, when Batul Bazi posted that she was going to stop posting videos with music in it, wallahi guys, I literally think that was like the switch to it all. It was at that time that I started taking down my videos. I started taking down everything with music in it. And then I started taking down anything with me wearing improper hijab or me wearing makeup. And then I just took down everything with my face. And although I can argue that that's not mandatory, I just wasn't comfortable with it anymore, because my intention has been to help other people, to share my love for Islam and help others who were in my position that I was in a few years ago when I either wasn't as practicing or when I was struggling with my iman. And that's what brings me to why I'm starting this podcast. I wish I had like an older sister that I could look up to and get advice from. And I didn't have that growing up. So there were a lot of things I kind of had to navigate on my own. And not being immersed in a Muslim community as well growing up had its effect on me. And because of all that in combination, I just feel like there's so much I have to share that would help so many of you guys, because a lot of you guys have been asking me to start a podcast because of course I would talk about and elaborate things on my TikTok, and I get a lot of DMs telling me that they found it very impactful for themselves or asking me more questions. And a lot of the questions that I get asked require a very long discussion because there's a lot that goes into it and there's always a lot to unpack. Alhamdulillah, I feel like I'm finally content with the way that I present myself online and my presence online currently, because I, number one, should not have to and do not want to present myself online in a way that I beautify myself, nor do I want to feel like I have to beautify myself in order to leverage the khair that I want to bring online, in order to leverage pieces of advice I feel like would help other people, or things that I learned, or like sadaqah jariyah, for example, because all that in a sense I guess is sadaqah jariyah. I don't want to do that. And also, like, another reason why I kind of stopped putting myself out on social media the way that I was is because the end doesn't justify the mean. A lot of what I was doing was displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And alhamdulillah, in many aspects of my life, I really did change my priorities to make sure that it is in line with Islam and the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to mention, all the good I thought I could be bringing online might just backfire. Like, I might have just been shooting myself in the foot this entire time. Why? Because whenever I think to my social media, I look at my likes or I look at my follows, and I literally think for every one of those likes, that could be a sin for posting with music, posting with improper hijab, posting with makeup, and so on and so forth. Like, what was I thinking? May Allah forgive me, alhamdulillah, for changes. But genuinely, for anyone who's listening to this as well, think about what you're doing. The one thing that we're not going to ever run away from is death and the akhirah. Imagine you're standing on Yawm al-Qiyamah and you either, number one, thought that you're doing so much good on social media because you're inspiring other people or you're showing your journey or whatever, but you exposing yourself in a state that is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people, right? Whether it's with music or showing your hair or whatever and whatnot, that will all count as sins for you on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Like, imagine having a mountain of sins on your scale. Just a piece of advice to anyone who's a non-hijabi listening to this. Number one, may Allah make it easy for you. Trust me, been there. But please think about limiting your exposure. So at least if you're not going to wear hijab, don't post it online. No one's forcing you to post online, so don't do it. Guys, when I really realized this, it's not worth it, guys. I promise you, it's not worth it. But again, we'll dive into the whole hijab talk a different time, inshallah. But yeah, I really wanted an opportunity to fully discuss a lot of topics that I've either been asked or things that I feel like should be spoken about. All of which I will talk about are related to Islam in one way or another. And it's not specific to hijab. It's not specific to one type of struggle. It's not specific to any of that. Now, of course, this podcast will focus on a lot of things that Muslim youth who grew up in the West will be able to relate to. My goal is honestly, with each episode that goes by, we continue to reflect on our meaning, our reason as to why we're here, and prepare ourselves for our akhirah. Hence the title, You Only Live Twice. It's like a little spin-off of You Only Live Once, but the reality is we live twice. Once in the dunya and forever in the akhirah. And inshallah, this podcast really helps us navigate on how we can position ourselves to live in the best day possible for our akhirah. I'd like to have a common theme for each oncoming episode, and I would expect them to come out probably bi-weekly, like once every 2 weeks, inshallah. Of course, this is just the first episode, so any episode coming on after this will have a different structure, and I do want to incorporate stuff from you guys, whether that's questions you guys send me and we can discuss them here, certain topics, certain concerns, unpacking that, and of course having that relate to like the theme of the episode. But something I want to emphasize really quickly is that I am not a scholar. I am not a sheikh, although I will be talking about Islam, talking about certain concepts. I'll be mentioning hadiths, which, by the way, when I bring something on, I will be providing sources, inshallah. But this isn't a podcast of knowledge. More so, this is something that I feel like you guys can resonate with. More so discussion or conversation oriented. And like I said in the beginning, a lot of what I say will be related to experiences that I've went through. Now, heavy disclaimer, I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect at all. I changed so much in the last few years, let alone the last few months. And I'm still changing. Throughout this entire time, throughout this entire journey that I've had with Islam, I never once reached a level of perfection. Honestly, no one is going to be perfect. We're human. We're meant to make mistakes. We will continue making mistakes. Of course, the goal is to always find our way back. But I really want to emphasize this, because don't think that just because I'm here speaking about Islam, that I'm perfect and I don't have my shortcomings, because I really do. When it comes to this, honestly, sometimes it can feel like having imposter syndrome. Like sometimes I feel like I'm not the best to talk about certain things, or maybe it shouldn't be me, or maybe I shouldn't be doing something because how can I when I'm not perfect or anything. But whenever I think about this, I think about something I heard from Ammar al-Shukri. He once said that giving da'wah, which I guess you could say this is a type of da'wah, right? If not that, then speaking about Islam. But anyways, giving da'wah is like washing dishes. In the same way that you're cleaning your own hands while washing the dishes, When giving dawah or talking about Islam, you are also in turn cleansing your own heart. Everything I say, always, and I have said this from the very start, is a reminder to myself first before anyone else. I will always be as genuine and as authentic as can be. Alhamdulillah, because this really can be a sadaqah jariyah. It genuinely fulfills me so much when I hear that other people, even if it's just one person, by the way, is doing a little bit better. Anything good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and anything bad is a fault of me. Like I said, the last few months specifically, I think I've changed probably the most. And I went to Umrah in March, which I think was a catalyst to everything. I'm not gonna lie. During this window of time, I really did realize that this life is not a life to fulfill your desires in. This whole awakening, I guess you could really say, really made me reflect on what am I doing? Whether it's being around someone or talking with someone who might not be good for me, or having a bad habit. Like, for example, listening to music. In all honesty, I was so addicted to that. And I mean that with all the heaviness it implies. I had to re-record this specific segment all about music because although I stopped listening to it almost 5 months ago, it's still an itch that I struggle with and fight every single day. I want to be vulnerable and honest because sometimes it really can feel so lonely when you're going through it. And shout out to Farah actually, because she was the one who told me that I shouldn't try to be perfect with my podcast. And when it comes to this, I know I should be vulnerable, especially because there are other people who are in my position. The way I used to literally listen to music as soon as I wake up, when I'm making breakfast, when I'm getting ready, when I was driving somewhere, whether I was driving to work, driving to run errands, driving to hang out with my friends. When I was hanging out with my friends, we'd go on drives. Like, guys, I literally curated so many playlists for so many different vibes, especially because in the summer, like that's literally all I would do. I would go out and go on drives. Like sometimes I would literally drive the longer route just because I knew I wanted to listen to certain songs. Like I wanted to listen to more songs. It was just never enough. Like I just wanted more and more and more. And especially when you're in the car, like the way I had it, the volume all the way up, like windows, like guys, it was crazy. But that's because I used it as a distraction to everything that was going on in my life and as a crutch, like for example, when working out, like it was just that dopamine. It was just making me feel good. I was lifting good. I was working out good, like reaching a runner's high, listening to music. And it was 100% a crutch for my happiness as well. Growing up, I was not as conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nor did I even know or even think that we weren't supposed to listen to music, which it did have a big role in my life since I got an iPod, which was probably grade 2 or something. I was really young. So when I look back to every difficult time I experienced, the way that music was just so prominent, it made my highs feel so high from all the instant pleasure dopamine that I got from it, but it also made my lows feel extremely low, like breakdown crying type of stuff. It's not even until you stop listening to music that you realize all of that. Like I'm already such an emotional and sensitive person, so the way that this just amplified my mood swings, it was just so detrimental to my conscience. Sometimes I would attach music to like certain memories, and some memories are great and I love it and it would again make me feel just as good as I did in that moment, while other memories were so painful. Like it would make my mind go back to anything I was feeling during that time, and it was just so overstimulating. I feel like music in general was just very overstimulating, and me personally, I don't know if I have like a lower threshold, but I can get overstimulated very, very fast. And not only is music overstimulating just as is in isolation, but also all the emotions that I would be feeling on top of that was just so much. Once I knew music was haram, knowing my attachment to it, I never thought I would be able to minimize it, let alone leave it altogether. But I knew that this consistent sin that I was committing daily was getting out of hand. Over the last year especially, as I've been trying to be more God conscious, I knew that this occupied my heart and brain way more than anything. And when you feel like it can take precedence over your deen, that is when you know that you really have to stop for a second and just reflect. Especially when driving, I had an underlying fear that I might literally die in a car crash listening to music because I never even made the effort to stop. Like I was just living with that guilt. Like imagine that being your ending. You're blasting music, you're singing God knows what song, and boom, your life just is taken away in that second. That is how you die. My goal, and inshallah everyone else as well, plans to die saying La ilaha illallah because we want to be guaranteed Jannah. Car crashes happen very quickly. There are 3 things that can happen. Number 1, you're listening to music and your last few words will be a lyric. Number 2, you'll instinctively swear or take a breath and just pause and freeze. Or 3, you're able to say La ilaha illallah. Now, if you're listening to music 24/7, what makes you think so confidently that you'll be able to say La ilaha illallah in a time where you have no time to react? Because in reality, that will be an instinct. You will not have the time to think about saying that. It will come out instinctively. If you've built the habits of making dhikr 24/7 and remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala whenever you can, all the time, with every action that you do and surrounding every intention around Him, then of course there's going to be a greater chance for you to say it. And perhaps you abstaining from things that aren't good and trying to practice what is good, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us all mercy to say La ilaha illallah and have a righteous death. May Allah grant us all righteous endings and protect us from that. Allahumma ameen. So I think the fear of that was definitely a contribution to my decision. But despite all of that, I had my biggest pivot a few months ago, like I said. There was one day I was seated in my car and I was sobbing. So much so to the point where my eyes were so red, so swollen, puffy, all the works. Like I was crying, not just for 10 minutes, like over an hour. That was the weight of what I was dealing with. And I remember making dua and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help me with the situation that I was dealing with. Because although, of course, everything only happens by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I know that anything that can happen in the future only will happen with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreeing it. But this genuinely seemed a little bit more impossible, even though nothing is impossible, I know, but it just seemed more out of reach than like a basic thing. And throughout that, while I was making dua, I had a moment and I thought to myself, like, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful, He's the most generous, but how am I going to sit here and make dua when I cannot even let go of something or try to let go of something that displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It was genuinely out of humility that I knew that I had to actually let go of music, because in my head, although there was that correlation of, you know, maybe if I try to stop something for the sake of Allah, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless me with answering my dua. Which, by the way, guys, that dua was answered, but obviously I cannot sit here and say it was because of this that this happened. But the essence of all of this is me realizing that I have been blessed time and time and time again. And alhamdulillah, I'm very fortunate. I'm very privileged. And I know that. And I'm continuing to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for so many different things. And I can't even try. I can't even struggle for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over something that, although I guess music can seem very minimal, it was very major to me. It was just embarrassing. Like I genuinely felt so embarrassed. I really did. And it was from that moment onwards that I was like, I need to stop. And although it was sparked out of humility, it grew to circling back to wanting to live a life that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the best of my capabilities. Now, we're never all going to reach a level of perfection, and I completely understand that, but we need to be trying. And I can't believe looking back, like I was just okay with not trying. And that's what really gets to me. SubhanAllah, like I will never be able to personally let go or forget that memory that genuinely changed my perspective and my mindset, so much so that whenever I do have that itch, I think about that. Which, like I said in the beginning, guys, although I've been doing pretty well, alhamdulillah, over the last few months, I still need to take it day by day. Sometimes taking things step by step is just so much easier. And make dua. Do not be stingy with your dua, guys. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. Ask Him to help you let go of this addiction that you have, this habit that you have, or this attachment that you have to music. And subhanAllah, it wasn't until that I stopped listening to music that I realized how much music has affected me. Not just in the, yes, it makes my high really high, my lows really low, but the statement that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or Quran can occupy your heart, or music, and not both at the same time, is so true. It was only until I quit music that I realized how dependent I was on that to fulfill me rather than my deen, number one. Number two, it made me realize I'm not making enough dhikr at all. I'm not making enough dhikr. I'm not reciting enough Quran. It's making me lose my khushu', like it's making me lose my concentration during salah. It literally hindered my connection with Islam. It really did. So of course, when I stopped, I realized how much time I had during the day. I felt like I quite literally gained more time, which I didn't. I just realized that I had a lot more time to think and a lot more time to myself, which is why I suggest that if you're trying to quit music, number one, get to the root of it. Are you distracting yourself? I was. What are you distracting yourself from? How can you cope with it? If you're distracting yourself because you're going through hardship, turn to Allah. If you feel like you have a void, why do you have a void? Maybe you just don't like your underlying thoughts. Maybe you overthink and you just want something to kind of buzz that all out and make you relax. Listen to Quran. There are so many different things that you can do. So that's my first thing that I would suggest. Get to the root reason of why are you listening to music? Is it for the dopamine high? Understand the effects of it and so on. Number two is probably realize the implications this has. Like I said, loss of khushu during prayer, lack of listening to Quran, learning about Islam, all these different things, right? Although the reason of music being haram in itself should be enough to stop, sometimes you need those collective, very strong foundational reasons that will help you kind of gear yourself away from music. So again, get rid of the dependency and get to the root of it. Number two is understand the implications of it and with your iman, and understand the implications of that on your akhirah. Think about for every single second that you listen to music, the sins that will come up on your scale on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Every time you post with music, every time you share or recommend a song to someone, and all the times that they listen to it over and over and over again, you get implications off of that. Number three, have substitutions. So obviously your go-tos can be nasheeds, Quran, lectures, podcasts. You can listen to podcasts that don't have to be just Islamic, by the way. Have some diversity. Listen to different types of things. If you really like crime podcasts and that's what you want to listen to, or a crime series or documentaries or whatever, do that. I wouldn't recommend obviously mindlessly just listening to random things that have no benefit 24/7, but who says that you can't listen to things that you enjoy in addition to learning about Islam? When it comes to nasheeds and acoustics or vocals only, I would just tread carefully, because sometimes that can just, for me personally at least, it can make me want to listen to music even more. So just be careful with that. And number four is be okay with silence. You don't always need to be listening to something. Don't overstimulate yourself. And I'm saying this because I immediately reached to replace music with nasheeds, with podcasts, with lectures, with Quran all the time. And sometimes you just have to be okay with your own thoughts. Once you come to the root of realizing why you're distracting yourself and you kind of resolve that, silence is so peaceful. Like, it really is. And I cherish it a lot. And inshallah, you guys kind of do too. The last thing I want to mention is that you don't realize how little dhikr and how little dua you actually are making until you stop. Because with all that time that you were listening to music and now you're not, and you have silence or you don't know what to do when there's nothing going on, you start making dhikr 24/7. You start making dhikr, making your breakfast, making your lunch, on the way to the gym, on the way to see your friends. And of course, our dhikr is what's going to help us on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So you don't realize how little you are until you start doing it. And now you're like, wow, the fact that I wasn't doing any of this, like the only dhikr I used to make was probably directly after salah, and other times obviously I was at the masjid or going to the masjid or like reading Quran, like in those moments specifically where I dedicated me sitting down and allotting that time just to Quran or worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we obviously can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many different ways by changing our intentions and all of our actions throughout our day, and even just saying our dhikr. So just saying subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu akbar, la ilaha illallah, and making istighfar. Astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. It made me realize that I have a lot of things that I can be making istighfar about, and I have a lot of things that I can be fixing about myself. Without music, honestly, the amount of clarity that you gain is crazy. And alhamdulillah, the byproduct of just remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. And again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I don't have those craves. It's not like a crutch that I've used for years and years and years on end suddenly dissipates and I no longer feel a crave or a sense of want towards it. But it's because of everything that I said that kind of grounds me and aids me in continuing to try my best to stop music. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us all. Allahumma ameen. Something else I forgot to mention is make sure you have friends who are supportive in your growth, whether that's related to Islam or anything in general, but obviously I'm going to specifically talk about Islam and listening to music. I feel like because I became so desensitized to this specific sin, I had a reason to get shy when I would tell someone that I don't want to listen to music. For example, I was telling my close non-Muslim friend who's actually learning about Islam right now, which make dua for her, Allah hdiha. I'm very excited. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide her to Islam. But we haven't spoken in a few months just because obviously life. We used to go on drives and blast music together all the time last summer. That became our thing. We used to get Starbucks, go for a drive, talk, and then listen to music and whatever. And the last time we really got to see each other and really talk or go out was in January. Obviously, before I fully left music. We used to recommend songs to each other and add it to our playlist and make a playlist together. So when we finally decided that we're going to catch up, we're going to go out, she sent me a text and she was like, oh my God, I have so many songs I have to show you. And I replied with, I stopped listening to music, which I was kind of shying away from saying, not because I think she would have a bad reaction, but because I know that we loved doing it together. I just felt like I didn't want to be a burden for her on that. I don't know, it's really hard to explain. But despite not being able to do all the things that we used to do, she told me that she's proud of me and she's proud of the steps that I'm taking to fulfill my deen. And she understands that this is what's best for myself. And if your friends have any other reaction than that, to be frank, they're not your friends. Because again, they're not supposed to be the ones dragging you away, rather the opposite. And if not, then neutral. Having fun, by the way, is not limited to just listening to music. I was just showing that as an example of who you should be surrounding yourself with. And again, that is people who encourage growth and enable it. So I'm not saying your friend necessarily has to be exactly with you every step of the way, because they're going to have their own struggles. They're going to have their own shortcomings. Maybe they thrive in things that you don't, and vice versa. They struggle with things that you don't. But again, it comes to encouraging each other and allowing for that growth and enabling that growth, giving it room and watering that plant when they can. I think that's such a beautiful essence and such a beautiful aspect of friendship. But alhamdulillah, yeah, that's a habit that I've tried to really let go of over the last few months. And alhamdulillah, it's going well. Inshallah, we all continue to work on ourselves to best prepare ourselves for our akhirah. One last thing I do want to end off with is that when you really, really sit down with yourself and make the goal of using this dunya for your akhirah, and it doesn't mean like isolate yourself and only pray, like, no, it can be living your daily life, switching small intentions, using your hobbies to benefit you for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or allowing those things to become a sadaqah jariyah for you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. Do not think for 1 second, if you're trying to get closer to Him, that He'll make it harder for you to get closer to Him. You go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala walking, He'll come to you running. Again, there are so many things that we can just talk about, but we will have a time and place for that in the next few episodes, inshallah. Some topics off the top of my head that I think will require a whole episode are salah, reconnecting with Islam, whether you had or are having a low iman phase, because iman is expected to fluctuate. It's expected to rise and fall. Hijab, actually embracing tawakkul, detaching from the westernized or modernized point of view and perspective, and embracing the Islamic values and lifestyles. In general, we will aim on navigating Islam and working on our akhirah one episode at a time. I'd really appreciate feedback on this episode. I think it's going to be much, much needed. Do feel free to share this with anyone. Please send a message through Instagram. I do read almost all my messages. I just have a harder time replying to some because I want to give 110% of my energy back to you guys and not some lazy quick reply. So it does limit how much I do end up messaging back, but keep in mind, I'm also a student and it's summer, so I do have things that are going on which are also occupying my time, but I most definitely want to read through as many as possible. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening to this entire episode. I cannot express how much I truly appreciate it. I love you guys all so much for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and inshallah I see you in the next episode, probably 2 weeks from now if I had to guess. I'll see you there, inshallah. Salam.